Hello YouTube, I've got a really special video for you guys today because I'm finally making Jabba the Hutt. This is a figure that I've wanted to make for a really long time. So you can see into this big ball of aluminium foil, I've just made a ridge for where the mouth is going to be, another one for the lower part of the chin, and then I've just squashed the aluminium foil up to make a tail. I've made it really rounded at the bottom but quite flat on that right hand side. I love using aluminium foil for these initial stages because it all happens really quite quickly. Like already he starts to look a little bit like Jabba the Hutt. You can see on the top there I just made the head fairly pointed. He just has that kind of ridge on the top of his head. Right, this is going to be quite a full-on build because I want to make his throne as well. And I also want to make all the bits and bobs that go on his throne. But I started off with a whole load of lengths of pine that were about 7 or 8 foot long. And I've just chopped them up using my chop saw into these lengths just to give me the main kind of lengths of the throne and then the main widths going across. I also had these edging pieces that have got nice kind of rounded corners to them. So I'm going to chop those up as well so that you can see the corner parts. They'll all join together nicely and that'll give me that nice kind of rounded edge. If you've seen my channel before, you've probably seen that I've already made Max Rebo and the Rebo Band. I've made a Gamorrean Guard. I've done Ree-Yees and Greedo. So quite a few other characters from like the Jabba Palace scene. But Jabba the Hutt is one that, like I say, it's been on my to-do list for a really long time. This was just me positioning my aluminium ball Jabba the Hutt just to give me the idea of the scale and see if I was heading in the right direction. Right, I then drilled a whole load of holes in the front and the back longest lengths of wood, and then I've screwed through into the width parts. And you can see here, this gives me all of the bits joined together. I've also used little nails to hammer in all of the edging along the top, and that again has made it all nice and solid, and it's all ready for some flat pieces of wood along the top to make the floor that Jabba's going to sit on. I would have used plywood to do the floor because it's stronger, but I couldn't find any. I had a look around and all I managed to find was just some MDF. But I'm going to do it in probably a couple of panels across the top of here. And you can see it will attach nicely because it'll go all the way around the edge and onto those beams in the middle. Gives it a lot of support in the middle. Okay, this is with the MDF on. You can see I've used a sander just to go around all the edges and just smooth it all in, round off all the corners, and it'll all be much nicer because I'm going to use a bit of Milliput to fill in all the holes where the screws are and also all of those little gaps. This is Milliput. If you haven't used Milliput before, it's a two-part putty. You mix the two parts together in equal amounts and it sets rock hard in about 4 hours. It's just really easy to apply for any kind of gap filling purposes. So there you go, you can see I've gone along all of those edges with a bit of Milliput, and now you can't see any of those kind of little gaps anywhere. All of the screw holes have disappeared, and all of this can be sanded as well. That's the great thing with Milliput. Once it's hardened, you can just go over it with a power sander really easily, and it smooths it all, and then it'll all be ready for painting. Okay, this little wire frame that I've made, this is just 2mm aluminium wire, really easy to bend and all twisted around itself. I've created just the starting point for the stand that Jabba's hooker's going to go on. Now, the hooker thing is like a sort of smoking pipe. It's a bit like a sort of a big bong type thing that Jabba the Hutt smokes from. Okay, and what I've done here, I've gone over my aluminium ball that was Jabba, just with kitchen paper and super PVA glue. I actually use wood flooring PVA glue, which is really strong. Don't just use kids PVA glue because it's not strong enough. Okay, you can see I've gone around the wire armature with more Milliput. This starts to give some solidity to the form of this kind of structure. This was kind of the really quick, really loose stage of putting the Milliput onto this. It's basically just to cover up the wire. Once all of this sets, I can go over and I can add some more Milliput over the top and really start kind of working into it a lot more of the sort of the detail of the form that I want to get on that. Okay, I also wanted to start sculpting on Jabba with Milliput. This particular Milliput that I'm using is silver grey. It's one of my favourite, well, I think it is actually my favourite colour. And you can see I put the very basic shape on first, and then I've gone back in and I've done like the nostrils, done a bit of detailing on the chin, and the eye was just a ball of Milliput cut in half, and then I've stuck that on and started working into that. I noticed, by the way, that my tail wasn't quite long enough on Jabba, so I chopped it off. I'll show you that in a second. But you can see I started adding details like the eyelids. That's just a case of putting on thin kind of layers of Milliput and then just working into it with like a ball stylus tool. That's where I chopped his tail off. I literally just sawed down the middle there. I've opened up the gap and I've added a bit on the bottom as well because I realised he wasn't quite big enough. That just means that I can make his belly even bigger. You can see I used a lot of kind of sausages of Milliput to make the folds under his chin. That was just a case of doing one at a time, squashing them in, and then adding the wrinkles over the top. Okay, you can see I filled with more aluminium foil into the gap, went over the top, added more, so he's a lot bigger now, but much more the scale that he should be. With the arms, I just made a couple of holes with a drill and I added some aluminium wires, twisted them around themselves, and then I've got 3 wires for the fingers on the ends of the hands. Now, some things show Jabba the Hutt with 4 fingers. I'm going from the Return of the Jedi version, which shows him with 3 fingers. Return of the Jedi was the first movie that I ever saw at the cinema, so it means a lot to me. That's the Jabba that I know and love the most. Although I am doing this sculpt as almost like a cross between that one and the 80s Kenner toy version of Jabba the Hutt because I love that as well. It's quite nice when you can take elements from 2 different things to get the overall effect. You can see the effect that I get here just by pressing into flat surfaces of Milliput, just with like one of these silicone tools. The silicone tools are really good because they're really kind of rubbery and flexible, and you can also wet the Milliput a little bit as well if you want it to go a bit smoother still. But any kind of ridges and creases and little folds and things like that are really easy to do with a tool like this, especially when you've just put the Milliput on and it's kind of at its softest. Another thing I love about Milliput is when it started to harden, like if it's been hardening for say an hour or a couple of hours, you can't really use these silicone tools anymore. They're a bit too rubbery and soft, but you can start going in with things like palette knives and things like that. You can see what I mean about this silver grey coloured Milliput. It really shows up all the details really nicely because it's such a bright colour. Okay, you can see the bulge that I made on the tail there. I widened the tail quite a bit and I've added a few more kind of bumps and things on his head, and that really starts to look much more like the Jabba the Hutt that I know. So you can see how huge Jabba the Hutt is. Like he's a great big lump basically. So you wouldn't want to make the whole thing out of solid Milliput because that would end up costing you a fortune. I'm really lucky because I'm sponsored by Milliput, so they send me free Milliput from time to time. But even with that, I like to do it just as a kind of an outer shell because it's much more cost effective just to save the Milliput for all the good stuff, all the details on the outside surface, and just use aluminium foil or something to bulk out the main figure. Okay, the floor of Jabba the Hutt's throne is made up of all kind of like slabs of stone. So I've got that effect by just adding some milliput ridges along there with kind of gaps between them. That'll show up even more when I paint it. I've then added some milliput texture, just really rough in there, and just kind of flicked it around with my finger. And then I've added blobs of glue as well on there, and you can see That's all the PVA glue, and I'm just waiting for that to dry. That'll give a whole load of really nice good texture, and then I can paint it all. This is just showing you that I did exactly the same thing to the front sections as well, and I did the same to the side. More Milliput and more glue blobs. And you can see where the PVA has started to dry, it starts to go clear. But I've got to wait until it completely dries before I paint the whole thing. And I'm just going to paint it all like a nice flat grey to start with, and then I can start adding other colours into it. Here you go. This is it all painted nice and grey, just nice and flat, but all the texture shows up. I can then add kind of washes of other colours into this, and if you add any paint into this wet, it will sink down into all the kind of deepest areas, especially those kind of cracks between the tiles. You can use paint that's like a darker grey colour for doing that, or you can even use black as long as it's kind of watered down quite a lot. You can also dry brush some sort of creamy colours as well over the top of the stone, and that makes the stone look more realistic. Right, going back to Jabba, you can see I've been working on him quite a bit more. I've added a lot of kind of warts and bumps over the top. That's just a case of making like little balls of milliput, kind of squashing them on the top and then smoothing them in with a ball stylus tool at the edges, and maybe even adding like a little kind of a little hole in the middle of some of the bumps. That works quite well. I've also done these kind of paw things that he has on his tail, and they're a case of, again, making like a ball, squashing it on, and then adding like a sort of a crater in the middle of each one. That works really well. So that was him all ready for painting. You can see the first stage was just to take some kind of yellow ochre colour, and I just painted the whole of Jabba. It's just much quicker to do this, to paint a figure all completely in one colour, because you're not worrying about what colour's got to go where, you're just putting it over the whole thing. Makes it much quicker. Okay, then I dry brushed this kind of grey-green colour over the top, and you can see that starts to bring out some of the textures. One thing to note that's quite important with Jabba the Hutt, okay, with a lot of my figures, I quite often paint them black to start with, or a really dark colour, and the black gets down into all those deep cracks and things, and then I dry brush lighter colours over the top. With Jabba the Hutt, he's kind of the opposite, because I've gone in with a light colour first, that yellow ochre colour, and then I'm building up darker colours over the top, and I'm doing the same thing, I'm dry brushing them on, but what is showing up are all of the little cracks in the lighter colour, and that looks really, really good on Jabba the Hutt. It's definitely worth trying to get that effect. You don't have to go really dark instantly. I mean, you can see the colour that I used there, this kind of greyish green, that tonally is not that much darker than the yellow ochre colour. But I will very, very gradually build up all the sort of darker greens and browns over the top of this. I'm really pleased with how he's looking already though at this stage, and you can see all of the textures that I did on the back. Quite often with my sculpts I don't bother doing much detail on the back because most of them are always kind of viewed from the front, so I don't, yeah, it's just a waste of time. But with Jabba, because he's so kind of special to me, I thought I'll go for it and I'll add all of the creases and things onto his back as well. Right, this is just some hint of a kind of a light brown colour. I've put some in his mouth, and then I've dry brushed bits here and there, just to start the effect off really. It needs a lot more kind of blending in, but you can start to see what it's going to look like. You can see the brown tucks under his tail, and there's some obviously in his mouth and that kind of thing. But if you're trying to make a brown, it's really just red and green basically. So I used emerald green mixed with a little bit of cadmium red. I'm using a paint called System 3 acrylic paint. It's really readily available, you can find it everywhere, but I use it for all of my kind of figure work. It's one of those paints that is absolutely fantastic. The only thing is, after it's dried, if you were to kind of nudge up against Jabba the Hutt, or kind of rub him against a wall by accident or something, some of the paint could scrape off. So what I do is after I finish the painting stage, I sometimes go over the whole figure with another layer of, very thin layer of flooring PVA glue, and that kind of seals it, gives it a slight shine, which will work particularly well with Jabba the Hutt because he is quite a slimy character, and it also protects the paint. Right, you could see that I'd gone in there with a dark green, and this is where I've gone in even darker still. So it's just a mix of emerald green and black mainly, and that works really well. If you haven't done dry brushing before, it's where you get some paint on your brush and then you rub that on some sheets of kitchen paper until it's really almost dry, and then you just rub it over the top surfaces of all of these kind of folds and creases and things. So it leaves all of those light dips in all of the creases still showing, and it's just kind of putting like a powdery paint onto all the uppermost surfaces, and it just gives a really, really good effect. It really does end up looking like skin. Right, that's him with all of the main painting stages done, apart from all the kind of finishing touches at the end and things like his eyes. So now it was time to give him a coating of the PVA glue. And you can see when you first put it on, it's a bit scary because it changes the look of him a lot because it's white. But the white disappears, obviously, and it becomes clear. And then he looks a lot more kind of shiny and slimy and more like Jabba the Hutt. Right, while I was waiting for the glue to dry, it gave me a chance to work on some of the features of his throne. So I made these discs out of superfine white milliput. You can see they're just really basic circles, just slightly rounded off. They're not very perfect, but they're a good shape. And then these, I squashed some superfine white milliput into some lids that were from, I think it was like a insect repellent or something like that. And this Tamiya craft saw, I was able to just slice into these and then cut out a chunk from each one to make the kind of rough mouth shape for each of the little gargoyles. The reason that I cast them is because I knew that I had to make 6 fairly identical heads. So casting is a good idea. Okay, you can see that I had these little kind of clip rings and I was able to put those through. I used a little Dremel drill to make those kind of notches at the sides of each mouth. And then I drilled a little hole, put a wire in and super glued it in place. And then you can see that feeds through the circle, and then I've made holes in the throne, and that'll just slot straight into the holes on the throne, and I can super glue them on and then paint them all up. Obviously I have to make all of the other details though to go on the heads first, like they need a whole load of teeth and eyes and a nose and that kind of thing. But you can see here where I just put them in position roughly just to see what it was going to look like overall. And you can see I used the superfine white as well to start sculpting a bit more into this. And you can see I've gone right round the corner, and that's much better. I think in the actual movie, Return of the Jedi, I think Jabba the Hutt leans back on that as well. So it's kind of like something for him to sort of sit on. Okay, you can see that I've got a clear dome that I managed to find, and I'm using that to go on his hooker. And then I've also added this ring on the top. And what I'm going to do is add there's a clear ball that I've got to put on later as well. Right, this is the actual pipe, and you can see that was just made out of a really long sausage of milliput, just kind of shaped. And then I've added a wire over the top and some little extra bits squashed on. And I decided at this point that everything was looking a bit too bright white, so I basically just spray painted everything black in this kind of matte black, and it looks really quite cool. I've still got the details to put on the heads, but it's just really nice seeing them all black instead of white. Gives me a much better idea what the whole thing's going to end up looking like. So I then spent quite a long time making all of the little details for each of the heads, things like lips and the noses, and they've all got just a single eye. They're like Cyclops little monsters, and then you do all the teeth as well. Luckily, I had a load of teeth that I'd made separately for monsters and things in the past, and I was able to stick those on. And then I've painted them to look bronze. So what you basically do is paint them black initially, then go over with some sort of slightly turquoisey green, and then you kind of dry brush some gold over the top. It makes them look like they're made of bronze, which is really cool. Okay, on this you can see I've dry brushed brown onto his little stand thing, and I've added some gold details. I've done gold on his pipe as well, and I've put a little wire on, super glued that in place. You can see on his eyes I've painted all the little details into the eyes, and then I've gone over with some UV resin, and that gives it that glossy look. Right, here's how his hooker's looking, and you can see all the individual parts that I've made. So this was just a couple of clear domes from Lego that I adapted a little bit. I've got some UV resin here, and the plan is to add some kind of liquid effects into these kind of domes and things. I've got that UV torch there that you can see it has different settings, different types of UV light that come out, and you can harden the resin with that. I made this little kind of creature that goes in. You probably remember it in the movie. There's a point where Jabba the Hutt goes and he grabs something out of his hooker and then he eats it, and it's like a sort of a frog creature with like loads of kind of tentacle bits on it. It's really cool. So I made that to go in there. Um, I've got this bit where I'm going to add a little bit of cotton wool so it looks like it's got smoke inside it, and that should work quite well. You can see I've painted all those bits black and they're ready for a kind of dry brush of gold over the top. Okay, there's the little creature in this kind of soup of UV resin. So when I put the UV resin in, I added a little bit of the food colouring that I showed you a second ago, and a little bit of yellow paint, and mixed it all together, and it just makes that really cool kind of clear soupy look to it. You can see I've painted everything black, and when I dry brushed over the top, I either dry brushed brown for his stand thing, or gold for the kind of metal details, and you can see overall that's looking really quite cool. And this is what he looks like all finished. So I am really super chuffed with this one. Every time I look at him it makes me smile, because it's just like having a little mini Jabba the Hutt sitting in my living room looking at me. So I've wanted to make him for so long, just because I've done all of the other creatures, like I say, from that scene, really. All the main ones anyway. So remember I said like I did the Gamorrean Guard. That was quite a full-on project as well. I also did the Rancor Monster actually, so yeah, check out that video if you get a chance. And the Rebo Band, Max Rebo with his sort of piano thing that he plays, that is one of the things that has taken me the longest, you know, of any of my projects that I've ever done, just because making his piano was so kind of complicated. But they all look absolutely amazing together, and to be able to add Jabba the Hutt to that mix is great. Obviously, I will have to make Salacious in a future video, and I'll make him to the same scale as Jabba so that I can actually sit him on this throne. So yeah, look out for that video in the future. But yeah, check out everything that I've done if you haven't seen them already. Hit subscribe to see anything that I post up in the future. A huge thanks to Milliput for sponsoring this channel, because I would not be able to make anywhere near as much as I do without them sending me free Milliput from time to time. It just makes such a difference, so huge thanks to them. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.